The webinar has been organised by the International Development Section of the Royal Statistical Society. Before I hand over to Emily Poskett, who is Head of International Development at the ONS, to chair this seminar, I would just like to mention that the session will be recorded, so you will hopefully find it soon on the RSS YouTube channel. I also wanted to mention that our committee will be looking for new members to join us in 2025, and we will circulate a call for new members shortly. So if you're interested in working with us, then please look out for the call and put your name forward. Over to you, Emily.
I'm Emily Poskett. I'm one of the heads of the ONS International Development Team. I'm pleased to be here together with Paula from the FCDO, and then our speakers, which is Garnet sitting next to me, and Theo Jaloza, who's based in Rwanda, and Craig Owen, who is based in Nigeria. Just to introduce myself and give a bit of background. So I am one of the team leaders in the ONS International Development Team. ONS has had an international development program since 2016, and since 2017 we've been posting statisticians abroad to work with their counterparts in countries in completely in Africa. And this is an opportunity for some of them to speak a little bit about their work, but I'll bring in Paula to talk a bit about FCDO and what their statisticians do overseas before I hand over to the speakers.
Brilliant, thanks ever so much, Emily, and thanks everyone for joining us today. We can love the opportunity to say a little bit about what we're doing in the FCDO and maybe pique a little bit of interest in new partnerships. So, just in case you're not familiar, you're probably familiar with the work of ONS as our sort of NSO and the excellence they lead internationally in building strong statistical systems. Within the FCDO, you're sort of moving into the wider government statistical service. So we're still in that mission of supporting good data to be used well in the right places to help countries progress on their development mission, but we work a little bit different. We're working with a broader set of data actors. In case you're not familiar, the FCDO is sort of the branch of government that leads on delivering the government's international mission. So our priorities for growth, security, nature and climate, development, and very much built on a foundation of partnerships. There are about 17,000 people in the FCDO now, delivering on different parts of our diplomatic, consular and development mission. And within that, we have a core team of statisticians, about 50 of us, who all work in servicing the data needs of the organisation. So the data that we need to get the right things done, the accountability, transparency and evidence for decision making that the FCDO needs for mission delivery. But we also work with international partners, host governments across the data ecosystem and statistical sectors to support in building both international and national systems, again, supporting that availability and use of fit-for-purpose data to get the right things done. The way we work within the ONS is we're spread across, within the FCDO, we work across corporate teams. That's where the accountability, transparency, narrative of impact sits. We're also based in central teams leading on policy and programming, which strengthen systems, also related to thematic and policy priorities. So we're sort of working in a very broad and deep way across the centre to sort of service that wide range of both what we need within the organisation, but what we think is servicing data needs as a global good. And then we have a branch of people like Craig and others who are embedded within our country posts. And I won't give spoilers, but Craig can sort of say a lot more about what that means on a day-to-day basis. But again, they're about building on this foundation of sort of partnerships with NSOs, with host governments, with other data actors, and working together to service our sort of ensure that we're continuing to build strong systems, respond to new opportunities of a modern data ecosystem, and ensure that we've got the availability and use of inclusive, responsible data to support in delivery of our international mission and country's own agendas. It's quite an exciting time in the FCDO. We're a new organisation with a new government, and we're in the middle of forming our strategy. So do keep an eye out for updates in this space. Lots of great emphasis on use of data and evidence. And also a bit of a spoiler, we've got a big recruitment round coming up shortly. So if you're interested in finding out more and potentially coming to join us over the coming months, I would be delighted to hear from you. So a little bit about us. So back to you, Emily.
Brilliant, thank you, Paula. I think if it makes the most sense, perhaps we ought to go to Craig first of all to carry on talking from a similar perspective, but giving the view of a country level FCDO statistician.
How do I get here? How do I end up in a country office? So I joined GSS. I won't say when. It was some time ago, but I joined with DEFRA. Years back. I worked on a number of roles across the office, including externally with the Marine Management Organisation as a Quingo or non-departmental body at that stage. After a few years there, I moved on to DH for a short stint in the dreaded NHS 111, working on stats from there, before joining DFID. And when I came to DFID, I worked in the Climate and Environment Department for a couple of years. And through that, I developed a much bigger interest in working overseas and working on development. And that led to me picking up a job in DFID Bangladesh, as it was at that stage. And I worked there for 3 years before moving on to DFID, the FCDO in Nepal, where I was there for 6 years. And then now I've been in Nigeria for just over a year. So why? I know I've touched a little bit on this already. The reason I joined DFID initially was I had a really strong interest in climate and environment. My background is in environmental sciences. So that really pulled me into DFID at that stage. But through that, I developed an interest in international development, like I said before, and that really helped me think to broaden out what I was doing. And I think I've always also had a preference of working at the coalface or working on delivery rather than policy and working from at a high level distance from what's happening on the ground. So the opportunity to work in a country was a really big pull for me. And I think one of the benefits, and Paula touched on this too, is of having statisticians like us in country embedded in our offices, is that often when we are in place, we're the only bilateral partner in country with staff from an official statistics background. And it's something many organisations are really interested in taking advantage of, especially the national stats offices in country, but also a lot of the multilaterals like the World Banks and the UN organisations who often have core funding or have access to different bits of funding coming from the UK, which we can help with. So we often get dragged into, well, not dragged, but we get asked to come in and help with that, which is a great part of the job. So for me personally, I think I followed work opportunities based on personal interest. And I enjoy opportunities to cover a broad portfolio of work, which you can definitely do in a country office, but also being able to dive into specific areas of interest, which is great as well. So in terms of, I think Paula's really covered like the high level reasons why we're there and the sorts of things we're doing, but the sorts of things we do in country are really, really broad. And it covers things from working with individual programs in country, our overseas development assistance funded programs, and we help with monitoring, evaluation and learning on these. And that's right from the design of these sorts of functions within programs through to commissioning, but also management and quality assurance of the products being developed through those different malfunctions. And then leading on from that, we are also responsible in country for doing results reporting. And a big part of that is managing the data quality. Again, these are coming out of the program malfunctions usually. So those links are really important between the malfunctions and the data that we're collecting to feed back into the centre for our results reporting processes. And that's continually changing based on priorities in the centre from ministers, from senior officials, and how that takes place has changed a lot over the last 10 years. And country as well, we also do a lot of work around evidence uptake, ensuring that the data and evidence being generated through our programs and from other sources, both internal and external to the office, are used to inform decision making. And that's decision making from program level, making sure that the evidence they're generating is being used in decision making, but right through to strategic portfolio level decision making as well. And there's a lot of work done recently on portfolio malfunctions, which have been popping up in different places around our country networks, where we have a function to bring together all that data and evidence being generated internally and using that to make so strategic high-level decisions about the shape of the portfolio. I think also we get opportunities as a statistician in country, we get a lot of opportunities to work on the data and statistics agenda, whether it's managing bilateral programs in country. In Nepal, I was lucky enough to work in quite a big program, working directly with the National Stats Office, but also with a whole range of other stakeholders across the data and stats ecosystem, including across the UN network, but also civil society, Planning Commission, Ministry of Finance, and state and local government as well. So it's really exciting and interesting stuff to do. But we also work a lot with partners who are funded, like I was saying before, funded through the FCDO Data for Development team or Paula's team. And we do a lot of work with them in country, like the World Bank, for example, has their global data facility, which is partially funded by FCDO. So we often dock in with them and support them in a lot of that work. And I've also worked with the bank on the income and expenditure surveys, which is the same as the Living Standards Survey. So we dock in with that as well. But we also do work with like UNFPA, and we used to have a program doing regional work on economic statistics in Asia, which I worked on through UNSCAP as well, supporting that team. So we get chances in country to dock in with that too. And of course, now I'm working in Nigeria, we're working with the ONS team a bit as well to support delivery of the work they're planning, both through their international work, but also a new CMP coming online on integrated sexual health. Right, the last slide is just on what have I learned. I think the key thing for me is that this work's been really, really interesting, challenging and rewarding. I've had amazing opportunities to live and work and visit places I don't think I'd otherwise would never have been to otherwise. Also made friends with some really, really incredible people and interesting people, working in difficult places and circumstances. But I think good to recognise too that this type of work requires quite a lot of commitment and does come at some cost as well. It impacts on families, both in terms of partners with limited career options, and children being forced to move around locations and shifting, moving away from friends and schools and learning across different systems. Opportunities to progress if you stay overseas are limited. It's difficult to promote unless you probably go back to the UK is the best way to do that. I think there's appetite to invest in this kind of work has decreased a little bit over the last 3 to 4 years since the merger, but that might change. Like Paula was saying, there's a lot of stuff coming through the system now with the new government, so that may come back on the rise. But we'd have to see what happens with that. But I think the main thing is that working in country can be quite volatile with budgets continually changing, so you're never quite sure on what resources you have available to do what work. Leadership changes all the time. I think in my 10 years overseas, I've had 11 development directors or the different equivalent. So it's almost like one a year. And there are lots of external factors that we've experienced ourselves, such as terrorist attacks, earthquakes, floods, really poor air quality in some locations, especially in the large Asian megacities. COVID evacuations. I think we were evacuated twice. Oh no, I don't think. Well, I know we were evacuated twice from Nepal during COVID. So the need to be really resilient and flexible doing this work is I think that's critical. But just to end on a positive note, there's lots of really great upsides to this kind of work, really interesting. And I don't think would have changed anything that I've done over the last 10, 11 years. But I think it's good to go into this sort of work with eyes wide open as well. Okay, so I'll end it there. I hope that's okay.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Craig. Really interesting to hear about your experiences, not just in Nigeria, but also in Nepal as well. So I think, are you ready to go, Garnet?
Sure.
I will hand to Garnet to talk about his experiences, and then to Theo, and then we'll take questions at the end.
I'm Garnet Compton. I work in the ONS International Development Team here at ONS. Well, I say here at ONS. I'm based in Zimbabwe as a strategic advisor. I also cover our partnership with Namibia remotely from here in Harare, and this is Harare if you've never been. Right. So what I want to cover is a bit of, like Craig has done, why I'm in this role and a bit of my background. Some change on. A bit of my typical day and what I've learned. And in case you're wondering and want to see what it's like to work in an African stats office, that little arrow is my office in the Zimbabwe Statistics Agency. All right, so why this role? I've worked in a number of government departments like you'll hear everybody else speak of, but for the last X number of years, I've done 3 censuses, the 2001, 2011, and partially of 2021, design and planning. I spent 15 years in the Titchfield office, and that's the Titchfield office looking at its gray best. So building up all that census experience, it also gave me the opportunities to work and share my census experience with some international partners. So I worked with Myanmar on their census. I worked with Sierra Leone on their census, and also did work with the UN and other partners around developing the principles and recommendations for population and housing censuses. So it gave me sort of a really good insight of where I might like to go if ever I got bored, and wanted to try something different. Met a lot of good colleagues doing really exciting things, but facing a lot of challenges. Then in about 2017, I think it was, Emily here advertised some posts for strategic advisors abroad. I applied for a post in Ethiopia, working with UN Economic Commission for Africa, and I found it really attractive, so I applied. So previously, I had spent 5 years in Ethiopia and I'm now in Zimbabwe. So kind of why Zimbabwe? It was a brand new partnership. Okay, it was a brand new partnership, so I was really excited. After I left Ethiopia, I applied to come work in Zimbabwe. Really wanted to come here for a number of reasons. One was that it was a brand new partnership, so the chance to start afresh. It was also the embassy here was really enthusiastic about the partnership and wanting to kind of strengthen the relationships with Zimbabwe and move away from traditional development models. So that was good. I really liked the people I had met at ZimStats previously. And it had a much different work-life balance, as you can see, than I'd had in Ethiopia. And I was keen to be able to go out and do much more at the weekends than Ethiopia provided, given various security concerns and other things in Ethiopia. So that's why I've ended up in Zimbabwe. But it's not all sort of jacarandas and wildlife. We do have we have a partnership with the Zimbabwe Statistics Agency. So the way it works is I'm embedded there. I work 4 days a week, roughly, in the office with ZimStats, and then a day a week in the embassy, working with embassy colleagues. And here are 4 kind of key areas that we're looking to work with ZimStats on over the next 4 years to kind of help them on their, transformation, modernization journey. So we'll be doing some stuff around strengthening their role in the national coordination role in the national statistical system. Things like the code of practice that you might see in the UK, they're keen to develop something like that here. They want to strengthen their methodological capacity and build a methodology directorate. So lots of data collection is around surveys. So they're looking to strengthen their sampling skills, but also their ability to measure and introduce quality, and also, given tighter resources, increase efficiencies in survey design or other data sources. Dissemination and communication of statistics is a big thing. It's not particularly, I think it's fair to say that across the region, the value of data isn't fully utilized. So there's a huge opportunity to improve the way data is disseminated and communicated, to improve access and improve impact. So that's an area. And lastly, it's around leadership activities and being able to be more user-centric and, as an organization, better able to react to external challenges or new needs that arise at short new policy needs, for example. So, it's about leadership and being able to manage change and prioritize through the organization. So we're helping them with that as well. So a typical day in life involves a lot of talk. I spend a lot of time talking to my ZimStats colleagues to really understand the problem around what they're talking about and to better understand the opportunities that are available for us to collaborate and work with them on to solve that problem or decide that it's not a problem, for example. So we do a lot of different activities as a result of those conversations. So basically, I'll gather some requirements, we'll work through a potential assistance plan, and then we deliver an assistance plan that looks different depending on what the problem is. So you've got some in-country training there in the bottom middle, where you're doing some training on coding. We're running facilitated workshops to bring people together to share experiences. We're doing leadership training and some really interesting things around doing field visits to understand how things work in the field, how can they be digitized to make them more efficient, improve quality. But I also get to live the life of an overseas diplomat and participate in embassy events, receptions, garden parties, and this is a series of cupcakes from the recent King's birthday party here. Okay, so what have I learned? It's been a hugely rewarding experience. Love it. I love being able to kind of talk and engage with people and see very quick results around the impact that you're having. That's really, I value that. Here's some things I've learned about working in an NSO. Joint delivery is really important. It's kind of the aim of what we're trying to do is build capacity and sustainable work. So doing things jointly is key. Understanding the drivers for change. So what really is the driver behind your problem? Sometimes it's just the boss wants to change, and you need to understand that because the people working below the boss may not want to change. So understanding that is kind of crucial. And that dynamic timing is really good, and understanding that you can get asked for things at short notice. So understanding that and being flexible. Understanding the donor landscape, a lot of donors working, so it's important to understand what they bring to the party, but also ensuring that you're not overlapping on delivery, but also where you can collaborate and work more closely together. And the big problem, or a big lesson I learned is it's understanding you're not giving differing advice as well. So seen that happen. Open, honest sharing of lessons, really important. It's really a good opportunity to share lessons, and sometimes people aren't as, that open culture isn't necessarily the same here, with people wanting to admit that they made a mistake and hear the reasons why that happens. That kind of learning to fail culture. And understanding the local context and how much pride there is in delivery. So very early on, I found out that I was keen to get rid of any printed books. There was no longer necessary because they just weren't nobody was reading them. But actually, one of the reasons that there was such a big barrier to replacing the need for printed books was around a pride in delivering something substantial, like a statistical output. And then there's just something about pace and managing your own expectations around what you can achieve in a period of time versus the amount of bureaucracy or whatever that may exist on your partner that means it may be slower than you would have hoped. So, and that's kind of a lesson for your own resilience, I think, over time. And that was it. That was all I wanted to cover today. Thanks very much for the opportunity, and I'll hand back to Emily.
Thank you, Garnet. And I see people have started putting questions in the chat. That's brilliant. But I think we'll hand to Theo to cover his experiences in Rwanda, and then perhaps come back round for any questions. So do continue to put questions in the chat, or there'll be an opportunity to raise your hand at the end. But I will hand to Theo now for his presentation.
Apologies, that's part of the daily work, dealing with a number of phone calls when you least expect them. So my presentation is going to be quite similar to what Garnet has covered, mainly because we do similar jobs, but our partnerships, I think, are at different levels. So as Emily said, I'm based here in Rwanda, in Kigali. I look, working, as Garnet said, strategic advisor to the NSO here in Rwanda, but also looking after Kenya. I joined, in terms of my journey to get to where I am now, I joined ONS in 2006. I was tempted to change this after Craig. Didn't want to reveal the length he's worked in civil service. But so I joined at a time when there was massive change in ONS, when we were moving the office from, apologies, I should have started by saying I don't have slides, but I can share some notes afterwards. So I joined when we were moving the head office from London to Newport in South Wales. It was a period which was challenging, but at the same time, it was, I think, a period of great opportunity for people who were just joining, because we lost a number of staff and we were thrown a bit in the deep end, which meant that we had to learn very quickly in order to keep up with the obligations that ONS had to the public in supplying data. And in this time, I have worked on labor market statistics, economic statistics, national accounts, and health statistics, which is what I was working on just before I came here. So for the full year of the pandemic, I was actually supporting the COVID response in the UK. During the period, I left ONS briefly to go and work at DWP, where I led the transformation of what is called the Customer Experience Survey, which is the instrument that DWP uses to understand how their service provision is being received by benefit claimants, but also those who are claiming pension credit. And in that time, I had the opportunity of working with ministers closely, and also with SPATs, which was the main reason that I went for that stint, because I needed that experience. And during, from 2015, so covering the period that I was with ONS and also with DWP, and then going back to ONS, I was also a member of the board for the Local Democracy and Boundary Commission for Wales, where I was one of the commissioners and also a member of their Audit and Risk Committee. I am mentioning this because I find that move to DWP and also being a member of that board, which is responsible for demarcating electoral boundaries, meant that I had worked with a lot of stakeholders in what was a difficult topic area. And I find that is actually very helpful in my current role here in Rwanda. And in terms of why I joined or applied for this job when Emily and the team advertised, partly is because as part of the work that I did in ONS, I think I had the opportunity to work on some what we can call groundbreaking pieces of work that other countries were interested in, especially when we were members of Eurostat. And that meant that I had a lot of opportunity to travel and actually share what we had done in ONS with those countries. But also, I think a little bit of a cliche reason for wanting to work in this area is that I was born and grew up in Malawi, where I did from primary school up to my first degree. I did that in Malawi. And I've always felt like I did not work in Malawi long enough to give back to what I got from it. So the next best thing for me was to actually take up this role. And I will not repeat what Garnet has said in terms of what the typical day responsibilities are, but they all align to our strategy. So this is the ONS strategy, which centers around having better statistics for the public good, and international strategy, which is for better statistics for the global good. My responsibility here in Rwanda is to ensure that I am driving the objectives of that partnership and making sure that they are aligning to what the UK and ONS values are. And in order to do that, I have to make sure that I understand the country plan for the UK and Rwanda, what the goals are. And there are quite a number of things in there that align very well with what we are trying to achieve here. And the core tenet of this partnership with Rwanda on statistics is to help them on their modernization journey. And this modernization actually covers the whole pipeline of the production of statistics, as Garnet has said. So the slide that Garnet had, which outlined the key priorities, is pretty much the same here. The main thing here, though, is that they're very big on wanting to utilize big data more. And by big data, we're looking at alternative sources of data. So data from mobile phones, for instance, data from satellite images, and also data from administrative systems. In terms of how I work or outline my daily work, the plan is I have a timetable that this is what I'm going to do this week. But if I have to be honest, and this job is very unstructured, and what I set out to do, like in a day, does not always turn out to be what I am doing on that particular day, simply because, as Garnet said, sometimes the priorities are driven by what the priorities for the DG on that day are. So sometimes I'll be driving to work, for instance, to the office at the NSO, and I get a call, say, oh, we are at this hotel, we have a meeting, and it's important that you should be here because I think it's going to impact on some of the things we want to do. And most of the times there are things that align with what we're trying to do. And in some cases, it's only because they want to be reassured that what they want to commit to with other development partners is actually going to be helpful to them as a statistics office. So they do take seriously the title that we have as strategic advisors. They want us to be providing some strategic advice. It's not just driving the relationship that we have forward. We have some key projects that we are working on, but the biggest one is that this year, NISA, this NSO, are doing two big rebasing exercises. The first one is on their national accounts, particularly on GDP, and the other one is on CPI. GDP, they're being supported by the IMF. On the CPI, we are supporting, ONS is supporting. So this is something that it takes up a lot of my day-to-day work currently. And this is in two parts. So there's a piece of work that is being supported by our prices division in ONS. So this is the team that produces the inflation figures that you see very often. The most recent one was last week or the week before. And the other part of that work is being supported by our data science campus. And this is essentially where we are modernizing the system that they have been using, which was developed by a consultant, and they have no ownership of it, and it causes them problems when it breaks down. What we're aiming to do now is to come up with a system that is transparent. Users can actually go find the code that is used to pull up prices data, and also when people leave the organization, they will be able to actually follow through what other people had done previously. At the moment, no one knows what's in the current system. And this, I think I've outlined a lot of positives, and but there are also some challenges, as I've alluded to, that the role itself is unstructured in nature. And this sometimes can bring some tensions when you have like some set goals that are expected at a certain time. And there are things that happen in country that you would not have planned for. So this year, for instance, was the 30th year of the commemoration of the genocide against the Tutsi. And we underestimated, I think, the amount of resource that it was going to take out of public bodies, including the NSO. And there was also a general election, again, that impacted on the delivery of some of the work, because, again, we thought the NSO would be spared from any electoral activities, which turned out not to be the case. Like Garnet, I spent 4 days a week at the embassy, the High Commission here. 4 days at the NSO and 1 day at the embassy. But the embassy itself has got a lot of priorities that sometimes we are expected to contribute to. And this sometimes can make it challenging, especially where we've got like 3 organizations essentially that you have to deal with. Also, sometimes because we've got 3 key sort of like people we report to, sometimes you can have a success in one of the High Commission will see something as a success that the other 2 may not see as a success. So it's just finding a fine balance in how you can actually deliver and maybe aim to please everyone, which can be a little bit difficult sometimes. Resilience is very important in this job because we're surrounded by great people, but sometimes people may not understand exactly what you're working on in the NSO. And I think just having some support around you is great, which we receive, or at least I know I receive from the embassy here and also from people back in ONS. In terms of lessons, I think for anyone who would be looking to do this job, it's build trust and relationships early. As soon as you arrive, you get a lot of invitations to go and do things. And this does not always have to be work related. You get invitations to go to weddings, like involving maybe for some of the local staff, or if there's been a bereavement and people from the office are going to a funeral. It's not the UK. These are open invitations. So it's not like you should expect to be specifically invited. It actually carries a lot and means a lot to people when you're able to do that. And it pays up you should do it because you want to do it, but it's if I have to be honest, it's an investment as well, because it helps make you look like human. And the balance that we have, Garnet alluded to, sometimes the senior leadership may agree to something that the people that they report to them may not see it as important. The other thing is that you could actually, because of the close relationship you have with the leadership, some people don't want to talk to you because they don't know what you're going to say to the leadership. So it's just striking a fine balance in how you build your relationship, understanding the UK priorities in the country, like I said, and also aligning those with the objectives of the partner. And the partnership is important, but identifying allies as well, who is like-minded to the UK, because sometimes if something is coming, depending on the situation and the environment you're working in, sometimes if the UK says something, they might push back because it's coming from the UK. Well, but if you go to another partner and say, okay, we want joint voices on this, then you end up actually succeeding. And I think I will stop there because otherwise we only have less than 10 minutes on time. But my role is essentially similar to Garnet's. Thank you.
Thanks, Theo. Really interesting to see some of the commonalities across the different experiences coming out there as well. So we've got a couple of questions in the chat. Tom, is he still there? Yes, Tom. Do you want to say anything about your question, Tom, about working with private sector and multinationals? Do you have a particular interest there on particular types of data, or do you just want to hear in general about how we work with other partners?
Theo said some things in his presentation, but I was interested in what the relationships are like, whether there's actually the FCDO can sort of share expertise about building these relationships if they're multinationals who are involved. But I was also curious about if you have the same difficulties with governance and privacy and technology that we have in the UK.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, and then Paddy has asked a question about inclusion of refugees and IDPs in national data. Do you want to come in, Paddy?
Thanks. I realise that this is quite a specific thematic area, but it's one that I work in. So thanks for your indulgence and nice to see everyone. Yeah, I realise that this isn't an opportunity in all countries, but it's just about whether that's something you're seeing across your networks of engagement. Because where we sit between the World Bank and UNHCR, we end up funding quite a lot of data collection, but what we're hoping to contribute to is a longer term shift towards inclusion in national stats. And, you know, different teams working with different NSOs in different contexts have different opportunities to do that. And especially if you're working with the World Bank on inclusion, particularly the technical aspects of inclusion, it would be really super to link up on it to make sure we don't miss opportunities to reinforce things or perhaps even work together. Thanks.
Brilliant. I mean, I can say from my perspective that obviously that both FCDO and ONS have committed to kind of supporting this agenda where possible, but like you say, it's not necessarily relevant in all the projects that we do, and it's a really helpful reminder to keep emphasising that point. Does anyone else have any questions? Otherwise, I will go back to any of the presenters to reflect on either of those questions. If no more questions, Craig, did you have any thoughts on either of the questions in the chat?
No, I'll put something back on Tom's on the private sector stuff. And I think in country, a lot of NSOs or in country are facing similar problems around tech and privacy and those sorts of things, but they may be even a few steps behind the UK and maybe worse off in some cases. The tech may not be as advanced as in some other countries, but I think the privacy laws and how to look after that are a few steps behind as well. And just on Paddy, really interesting question, and agreeing with Emily, I think it's something to keep in mind when we're pushing, especially working with the World Bank. We do a lot of stuff with the World Bank in different capacities. So that's something we keep an eye out. But the IDP's question is a really interesting one, and I know both other posts, IMO and ILO, have been interested in that as well, in terms of workforce and how they're working around in terms of labour within a country. That's a bit different to people being displaced, I guess. That's internal migration. But yeah, that's a really interesting thing to keep an eye out as well. And I think that's more likely to be captured in national surveys, people being displaced internally than refugees coming from external. But yeah, really interesting and something to keep an eye on, I think. That's all for me.
Thanks, Craig. Garnet, do you want to reflect on any of the questions?
I don't think I've got a lot to add on either of the points. I will say on the inclusion point that I know that here in Zimbabwe, they're looking at, the way that they can modularize quarterly labor force survey, for example, and looking to widen the scope of the labor force and how inclusive that can be. And we've briefly talked about types of work around helping them with those modules, and where we might be able to do things like how do you sample those populations to get you to a good thing. But that's as far as we've got at the moment. Over.
Thanks. Theo, did you want to say anything?
Yeah, so in terms of working with private sector, we haven't quite done that, although I wonder if we could consider academia as private sector. And if we can, then in Rwanda, we work closely with the African Institute for Mathematical Sciences, who do a lot of work around data science. And they're complementing the work we are doing in supporting NISR through another project that we have in ONS that I don't oversee like on a day-to-day basis, but I'm involved with. This is looking at the impact of climate change on health. There's potential to also work with, there's a drone company here. So Rwanda has for a long time wanted to use satellite images to detect, identify, and predict yield of crops. And this is something that actually joining in with the World Bank question that came up, something that the World Bank are pushing in Kenya and Tanzania as well. And there's been issues around the cost of the satellite images, but also quality of the images. And using drone images seems to be a cheaper alternative. And the drones actually are very good, like up to 3 millimeters resolution, which is fantastic. So I joined a meeting last week with NISR where they were exploring this, but they just wanted me in the room to see whether they will be making a good choice in doing that. Not that I'm a GIS expert. And then in Kenya, in terms of the inclusion, we work closely with the World Bank, and one of the things they've been pushing is for KNBS, the Stats Institute there, to include displaced people and refugees in household surveys. And they're going to do this for the first time. And ONS is going to be supporting, hopefully supporting that work through our methodology department, mostly just to look at the viability of that work. And that's it. Thank you.
Very interesting. I didn't know about that latest development in Kenya. That's very interesting. Thanks, Theo. Brilliant. So thanks to everybody for their time. Thanks to RSS for organising this, and thanks to speakers. And yeah, hope everybody has found that useful. I don't know, Cora, anybody, do you want to come back in from RSS point of view?
No, just to thank everyone. Really interesting experiences. And yeah, hopefully we can share with a few more people once it's been published and make, advertise a little bit more around that as well. So yeah, thanks very much and have a good day.
Thanks, everybody.